Hi guys, welcome to the You and I podcast. This week we're covering claimant conflict and mental health, and what that is focused on is really the whole 360 offering that DM does for these projects, but also how we deal with landowners, how we listen to them, but also how we make sure that our staff are looked after during this whole process. The world is getting busier. There's a lot of conflict out there, and we want to make sure we smooth that over and make sure that we really give our clients a smooth journey to success for their projects. Hi guys, welcome to podcast, and today we're covering claimant conflict and mental health. I'm joined by Pippa Wright and Alasdair. So Pippa, I've been with DM for a very long time. She came to us as a graduate, and then disappeared to go and do a bit more experience. And then actually we had her back for more, and she hasn't left. But she can tell you a bit more about her in a minute. We've got Alasdair, who is relatively new at DM, seeing the wonders in our Manchester office, but is our mental health first aider up there. Is going to help with the discussion we've got today, obviously, with mental health. So I'll hand over to you two. Pip, if you go first, tell us a bit more about you, what you got up to at DM, etc.
Yeah, so I started at DM in 2014 as a graduate, based in our Oxford office. I've worked across our networks, water, power generation sector, and the infrastructure sector. More recently, I have been involved in NSIP projects, predominantly offshore wind, and deal with projects from start right through to construction and reinstatement as well.
Okay, bro. Alasdair?
Yeah, so it's a new world to me. I've been with DM for 9 months, like you say, fairly new after 15 years in motor insurance, so very, very different. One of the things that drew me to DM was, well, I wanted a complete change in my career, and this is definitely it. Renewable energy, net zero and things like that. I think the reason I'm here is obviously in my previous role as a mental health first aider, and I brought that into DM, and there's been a big, big drive in that area for DM, which was a sort of real pulling point for me. So, yeah.
Good. Excellent. Good. Okay, so we're talking about claimant conflicts and how it affects us and them, if you know what I mean, in terms of what we're trying to do. I think to set the scene, it'd be quite good just to kind of understand the kind of projects that are now, and not just our projects, but all the projects that are now affecting UK, so that people understand the enormity of kind of what is happening out there and why this actually is an issue for us. Pip, maybe you kind of talk about, I mean, you talked about all the different sides of the business you've been involved with, but you said NSIP. Now, some people might not know what NSIP is, but it's basically a big project. Yeah. Maybe talk about some of the projects you're involved with.
Yeah, so an NSIP's a nationally significant infrastructure project, for those that aren't aware. Obviously, the UK has some pretty big net zero targets that we're trying to achieve. So we are seeing across our sectors, our clients gearing up to try to achieve those milestones. For example, in generation, we're seeing lots of solar developments, onshore wind, offshore wind, battery storage. But in order to get all of that electricity out, our networks team are then working on the Great Grid upgrade. So we have got some pretty major large-scale projects across the UK, not just in localised areas. And yeah, it's going to have quite an impact on.
Yeah, and I think what people don't realise is, so, you know, you talked about offshore wind and you talk about solar and you talk about all those things, and actually, okay, some of those have impact on the land, but an offshore wind farm, I think it's a good example that people don't realise. It's all offshore. I don't need to worry about it. It's not quite the case, is it? I mean, you know, I'm thinking of this project. Outer Dowsing is a good example project where you know, it's an offshore project, but you've got quite an effect on land.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Alasdair in particular, where we meet landfall and then to the point of our connection at the substation, that's a 64-kilometre cable route. It is an underground cable route, but there's still going to be temporary impacts to land there. And then we obviously have the substation as well, which needs to be built for us to be able to connect into. And then it's taking that electricity from there again via overhead lines.
Yeah. And I think the overhead line situation, you know, Grid are painting the picture for us in terms of what the next 30 years look like. And they're going to be building more than they have ever built before. Yeah. And, you know, people don't necessarily want it in their back garden.
No.
But like you say, for us to achieve net zero, you know,
a lot of work has to be done.
We've got to do it.
Yeah.
Which is where we come in.
Yes.
So just in terms of what we're also going on to the next phase, so we've got all these big projects, and we've been working on them obviously, you know, 20 years. You know, we've had big projects back in the day, and we've just got a massive amount of them now. Could the both of you kind of talk through the kind of process that is followed? Because obviously, there is a legal process, and I don't need to know warts and all that. We've done podcasts on those. But what I'm really interested in is if you were a landowner sitting there, what is the consultation kind of process that we go through?
Absolutely. So for us at DM, a big thing that we drive is that communication with landowners is key. We need to be open and honest with them and as transparent as possible to build trust with those landowners. So from the offset, when the project goes live online, we would issue initial comms out to landowners so they have initial letters, following which we'd then try to arrange face-to-face meetings.
And am I right saying, just in terms of that, is that when we do the initial consultation, we're not consulting on a single route, are we?
So we could have 3-4 different potential routes that might
corridors
be...
almost, aren't they?
They are corridors, yeah. So within which we would look for a defined route for cables, towers, whatever it might be.
So in terms of the consultation, we are actually consulting with an awful lot more people than are actually going to be physically affected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, the design isn't refined, and actually need to explore a number of different opportunities and options that might be available for the client to install their apparatus as they need to. And there might be a lot of constraints that we need to avoid. And actually, you need that wider area to be able to develop that design.
Yeah, I think that's why we focus on face-to-face, isn't it? Because there's so much information there that you can't get it over in a letter or, a phone call and things like that. And having that personal touch and the communication piece is really important. I think landowners and agents do appreciate that sort of personal touch from DM.
And I think it's absolutely right, because I think every landowner they're all different.
Yeah,
they've got different requirements, different pressures. And as a developer, you need to understand that, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think being personable as well, so they feel like they can ask you questions rather than sort of getting frustrated by it, and being able to approach you and things like that definitely helps.
We don't want to hide behind letters and emails. We want to be out there so they know they have got a point of contact that they can go to. And if you can keep that consistent as well, you're developing and building that relationship, which means they then have confidence to come to you and talk to you.
And I think the other thing to be clear is that these conversations aren't just rubber stamping. They are really useful for the developer, aren't they? It's for our clients.
Absolutely.
In terms of their decision making.
Yeah. And actually for landowners, if there is an issue on their land, we actually need to know about it. And for our clients, if they don't know, then they could come in and it could completely ruin the programme, and they're there for X amount longer because they were unaware of what's there.
So, yeah, and I think that sometimes people feel that these developers just are railroading people through into a decision. Yeah. And I think it's absolutely not that anymore. There are, every bit of feedback is taken in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And every client is different, but I think our clients are very aware that actually being visible and actually going and answering those questions and going to the consultation events and being seen there is actually really key for them to be able to develop their projects along the line.
So talk about consultation events. So these are where you have that face-to-face. Talk me through what that actually looks like, because some people wonder, well, what is that? Is it?
Yes.
How do they work?
They're usually at village halls, and they will have a whole board spread around a village hall, setting out the project as a whole. So not just focusing on land, it will be everything that goes with that in terms of your environmental studies and things like that. And they can come in, anybody can come in. You don't have to just be a landowner that's impacted. And they will generally send out flyers to a radius within the area for people to be able to come and attend. And they can come in, ask questions to the project team throughout, and just reassure themselves to make sure they understand what's actually going on.
And feedback's taken at those meetings as well.
Yeah, so generally we have a feedback form, and we would make notes whilst we're there as well. And you would go back and collate all of that information, review all of the feedback that you've had, and where possible, you would then action that feedback to help refine your design down. And then you'd go back out and consult on that refined area again. And
I mean, how do you find in terms of these consultation events, how well attended are they?
I guess it depends how emotive people are feeling around the project itself. Some are very heavily attended, depending on, some locals will lead in terms of, trying to drive people to go and attend those events. So you could have 100, 200, 300 people turn up to an event. Others where it's maybe not as controversial, that you might have 50, 60 people attend. It just very much depends on how people are feeling around the subject matter.
Yeah, and how much information you can share as well, I think. And finding on some of the projects is that they've got a little bit of fatigue with it. Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily going to attend the consultation events until they know that you can give them more information and things like that. So
Yeah, and I think if you're meeting, we found, I'm using Alasdair again, but we found that actually because we'd met with all of the landowners and given them the information, those that attended the consultations, it was more the public, the general public, that hadn't had that sort of.
So the actual people being affected already had that.
They had that information already, so they didn't feel like they needed to attend. We did have one or two attend, obviously, but they had enough information in front of them from the get-go that they didn't then feel like they needed to come to all the consultation events, which was really good.
Okay. And obviously the aim of this is that the client then chooses a route that's the best one for all the reasons. There's lots of reasons that go into making that decision. You're ultimately, I guess, trying to, by agreement, get consent out from people who are directly affected, rather than have to go down down the statutory route.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and what would you say, this is a bit of a question for you, but average-wise, what would you say our hit rate is on getting consent by agreement?
In terms of percentage, again, it depends on how contentious the project is, I think. Examples I've got across more of the offshore side would be between probably 75 to 95% sign-up rate, which is quite good. The higher rates we seem to see where landowners, I guess, are fully engaged in the process. They understand what's happening. They've had a say into what they're signing into. And by the time it comes to signing, they're more than happy to give their consent.
And do you find the people who are saying no from the get-go, you just can't change their mind, and actually you end up having to see them at the inquiry? Is that kind of how it works, or do you manage to sort those before inquiry?
So in some instances, we try our very best to work with the landowners who aren't wanting to cooperate or sign in, to try and alleviate their concerns. And sometimes we can get them on board. Other times, unfortunately, they will fight to the bitter end and turn up at an inquiry.
Right. So we talked about these meetings. I guess one of the things is that I feel that there are so many projects now happening. It's in the press. I think if you live in the east of the country at the moment, you're feeling, Christ, what's coming down the road? And so there is a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of fear. How's that impacting what we do at these consultation meetings? I mean, I've got some examples I'll talk about, but you give me some first in terms of some of the kind of the problems that we kind of see at these events.
Yeah, so I think, like you mentioned, there are certain areas that are being peppered by these projects. So emotions with landowners are quite high. So, we're sending our colleagues into situations where the landowner is probably going to be quite anxious, angry at the fact that there's another scheme coming through.
Ossian being an example in the east, we've just had consultation events in the last couple of weeks, and what we've found is that face-to-face piece is huge because they're getting confused, they've got fatigue, they've got 4 or 5 projects coming through their land. Yeah. When they come in frustrated and then they have a conversation with you and they realise, 1, it's underground, so they're more relaxed. 2, it's not the one they thought of, we're not National Grid and things like that. And once you actually have that conversation with them and sort of explain that they're much more relaxed and open to having conversations or further conversations with you, at which point we'll then potentially set up more private landowner meetings at their own address and things like that, so they can give a little bit more detail and shape plans and things. So one of the issues is confusion initially, definitely. Certainly in those busy areas anyway, is what we're finding on that
because
particular
multiple
project.
people, and I guess they're worried it's a pylon or they're worried it's...
Exactly. Yeah. It's pylons are the most contentious, I would say.
And there's quite a bit where you will go to a landowner meeting and actually they have a stack of envelopes and they say we don't even bother opening our post. So we could be contacting them about other projects. And, we are the face of quite a lot of projects in that area. Mm-hmm. And they just see letters coming through the door and they don't actually bother to open them and read them. So actually our comms don't always get through to these landowners, which is another big issue.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of acting for our clients, it can be quite daunting having to be present at these meetings where you've got people who are potentially going to come in. You talk about confused, probably angry as well. Is the opposite. Actually, we've had I'm sure we've had instances of that. And I guess how do we and our clients prepare ourselves for that?
Yeah, and I think at DM we are becoming more and more aware of these instances that are happening and incidents that are happening. in terms of going into meetings where landowners are angry, they don't want you there, and how they actually react to that situation isn't always the best way, and could be putting our people at risk. So we have developed a consultation training for all of our staff at DM. Anybody can go on to this training that's going to have to deal with consultations. And it basically runs through and teaches them how to act in situations which might be contentious, how to read, for example, a landowner's body language, learning to listen, which is actually quite a difficult thing. It sounds really simple, but actually it is quite hard to listen and focus on what you're trying to achieve in that meeting. And actually learning to understand what's driving the landowner to be, showing those emotions, essentially. And we just make them think about the health and safety of what they're doing. Are they carrying out dynamic risk assessments when they're going to site? It's an all-round programme that essentially kits them out so that they are fully prepared when they go into that situation. Because ultimately we don't know what reception we're going to get when we go into those meetings.
I think there's big focus on those soft skills, isn't there? We can be book smart, which is brilliant, and that's all the things that we learn, but those soft skills and how we adapt to different people, and I think that's really important, and that's something that there's a lot of time invested in, to making sure that, particularly, graduates going out there fresh to the business and things like that, and making sure they've got that knowledge and they're comfortable having those conversations, because the only real way you can learn is by being in the situation, I guess. You can give all that training up front, but being there and being supported by a senior, for example, is big at DM, and making sure nobody's left on their own to do it, which is huge. So,
and I think ensuring that they know that if they're in a situation where they feel uncomfortable, that they are given a way in which they can actually leave that situation, that we're not expecting them to stay there and feel unsafe or uncomfortable. They can actually leave those situations. And bring that back to the office, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. And that consultation event, I'm assuming that our clients have set them up so that is all possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's often a back room as well for people to go and take a bit of space, or, if there's a landowner that wants a more private conversation, these village halls do have a back room space that you can go and have that more private chat away from the masses, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's just a more comfortable environment for both parties, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as I said earlier, our clients are very aware of these situations now, and are very aware of their contractors that are working for them, and ensuring that actually, their well-being, is everybody doing okay? And when we go on to team calls, generally at the start, they will say, how's everybody doing? We've obviously had a week of hearings or a week of on-site meetings. Is everybody doing okay? From that, is there anything anybody wants to raise? So you do have a forum that you can raise if you're not okay, essentially, because it's very easy to take home. People can say some very personal things to you in the heat of the moment, but, some of us have been in it long enough that you just sort of brush it off, and it's not personal. They don't mean to say the thing. It's not targeted at you. But, for example, our graduates who aren't used to that will bring that back and be quite upset with how people have spoken to them.
Which is why we do the training.
Yeah.
Got you. Okay. Good thing to lead on to then, I guess, is just gives people a bit of a flavour of some of the examples. And probably the most horrific example that I can think of is what happened last year. I mean, it wasn't one of our people, but on a contract that we're involved with a water company client, one of our competitors went out to site there was two of them went to site to meet a landowner, ended up with severe injuries through stabbing, police involved, etc., absolute horror show. And you kind of think, well, how can I safeguard myself against that? And actually, when you look through it, there wasn't anything really actually you could have done. Now, luckily, that hasn't happened in 30 years of my experience here. I haven't heard of that before. But it just shows how, I think there's a lot of pressure on landowners now, not only with what we're doing, but, I'm afraid the government aren't helping them particularly at the moment. So all of this is building up. Have you got other examples, maybe not to that extreme nature?
Yeah, not quite as extreme as that, but we do come across conflict quite regularly across these projects. So some of the examples I've got, a colleague was outside noticing, putting the posts in the ground, sticking the notices to the posts, and a landowner's son was following behind her in a van very closely. And as soon as she'd put the post in, he'd get out the van, rip the posts out, and did that the whole way across the route that she was signposting that day, which is obviously very intimidating for her. He wasn't causing her any physical harm or anything like that, but actually it's a very intimidating process to have to be in front of. We've had landowners asking those with an agricultural background, with their parents really be proud of them for acting on schemes like this, which are going through agricultural land.
I mean, I can think of an example. It was a project in Wales, and it was a consultation event. We had everybody in, very nice. Family came in, talked to me about it, all that kind of stuff. 5 to 8, just before we shut the doors, we're all ready to get it down. The bar, we're in a pub. The bar doors flew open, and in comes this farmer who looked, you could tell he was angry, let's just put it that way. He was the son of the family. The family had gone back and told him X, which was not actually how it was, and he obviously came to explode. This is the one I said earlier, where I literally looked around to me, my left and my right, and every single person had disappeared. But you've got to be able to deal with that and calm the situation down. And you were talking about, reading people's mind, body language and listening. It's all very, very important things. So just on those examples, I guess what I'm also interested in is where we've had examples of kind of, I guess, contentious situations. And, you will get farmers coming in and landowners coming in shouting and what have you about it because they've got themselves in that state. It has an impact on our guys. How do we deal with that when we've done the consultation and finished it? Do we have a process that we follow for that?
I think this is the key bit, really, to be honest. It's that we'll always have a meeting with the client or like a debrief with the client. How did it go? They'll always ask, and we'll also feedback every time. The next step that we'll do is then an internal piece where people can be open, maybe a little bit even more open than they would be with the client specifically. They can give any information, anything they felt uncomfortable and things like that. If it goes to the next step again, that someone's really uncomfortable, then obviously they've got their line managers that they can speak to. And also then, as we discussed earlier, you've got mental health first aiders. So if it goes to that next level, where we can provide even contact numbers for certain helplines and things like that if required, and it's sort of gauging it. And that's where I think it's really important that the person that you're speaking to sort of understands the situation and can read a situation as well, to make sure you're sort of listening and directing in the right direction. I think lessons learned is a huge one, isn't it? So on those debriefs, making sure we act on them. So it's not just lip service, we have to act on them,
And making sure they're shared. It's not just in our team, but it has to be shared across the company. We can't keep those.
And that's where the one that you mentioned at the beginning there from the competitor that was stabbed, that one was shared really widely. I think across the industry, because it was so important. But I think maybe where we can improve is sharing what we feel are maybe slightly smaller ones, but they're just as important to the outside world to have that awareness of them, I think. So,
and just another question. Do you think we are good? And I mean, when I say we, not just DM, I mean the industry we work for. Do you think we're good at getting our messaging across of what we're trying to do? I mean, I was watching some absolute dribble on telly last night, and up popped a National Grid advert, which I thought, what's this about? And it was actually them selling the fact that they've got to build this network across the UK. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting that you're trying to get that information across. Do you think we do that well enough at the moment?
I don't think we do in terms of selling the end goal. I think client by client, they advertise, how many homes are going to be able to power and that sort of thing. But actually, I don't think we sell the benefits of what this means for the UK as a whole very well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I've not really thought about it like that. But maybe we're not as open with the information as we could be. We don't share the information, the rewards that come out of the back of it for everybody.
I think they see it or we potentially as well see it as a singular project, but actually we need to be showcasing that it's
huge,
part of a big puzzle.
It's a big change for the UK, full stop, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, okay. Good, okay. And just in terms of kind of, I guess, where you're seeing it, because we've been doing this a long time, are we seeing the mood change?
With landowners?
Yeah.
I think so, absolutely. And more so where, as you would understand, where projects are targeted, if there's an area where there are 4 or 5 happening in close proximity to each other over a very short period of time, we're finding that they're the sort of areas where we're most at risk, essentially, of that sort of behaviour.
And in terms of, so we're doing a lot of projects. There are other clients doing projects that we're not involved with. Is there a sharing of information that goes on?
I think it depends. I don't think it happens enough. I would say some clients actually are very engaged with projects that are happening in close proximity to them, because they have to be talking. But I think in terms of raising where there could be potential issues and red risk landowners, for example, I would say across organisations that isn't shared readily.
So maybe that's an area that actually we should be really pushing, I think, because in my head, I think it's kind of, it's twofold. Is absolutely, we've got other firms that work like we do for the acquirers, where absolutely there should be best practices that we should be sharing. But I actually think that there is a big responsibility on other agents out there who act for landowners, because I think, it's a job. We're trying to get things done for the greater good. And I think, everyone has their part to play. And sometimes I think that doesn't always happen.
No, I'd agree with that. I think agents could readily warn us to say, this meeting is probably going to be quite difficult. These are their concerns. And also, able to notify us of any previous actions that may have happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think equally, agents should be there sort of saying what DM are there for. We're facilitating the thing, basically. We want it to be as frictionless as possible. There's going to be a little bit of friction, but they can help us with that sort of transaction with the landowner, should I say. I think 'cause they know their people better than we will, rather than sort of sending us in blind. We do, want the same end goal. We don't want to upset people. So
there's probably work to be done there, isn't there? And that's more of a kind of PR thing, isn't it? And then actually getting people on board with it. Because I think sometimes I feel that there are agents out there who are almost making the situation worse.
Yes, they scaremonger.
Yeah, and that is not on, and is really not acceptable. But those are the kind of things that we need to stop from happening.
Yeah.
Can I just turn then to the mental health part of this? Because old days, we just carried on, get out there, do the meeting, come back,
get on with it.
Yeah. You wear your bulletproof jacket, and as a business, we've got a big duty of care for our staff. We want to make sure that actually, yes, okay, this can be a challenging job, but it should not be an unsafe job. Just from a mental health perspective, I know we've done an awful lot of work to make sure that we get that right.
Yeah.
Just give me you're obviously, you've been in 9 months. You're one of our mental health first aiders, which is great across the business. But give us your insights into kind of what we've done at DM to try and make sure that isn't a factor.
From day dot, actually, it was quite nice to see that a company investing both time and money in mental health, because it's a huge topic across every industry now. And like you say, we're putting our people in quite contentious situations. DM invested in a group of mental health first aiders, putting them through the training and then giving us the resources to be able to support not only our staff, but also impart knowledge on them for what they're taking to the outside world and for these meetings with the landowners. And like I say, the face-to-face piece is huge, but equally, if you need to have a conversation with someone over Teams in a different office because they need to compartmentalize what they've done, we've got those resources now. There's sort of 20 people in the business currently that are mental health first aid trained, which I don't think was there previously. So it's really refreshing to see a business growing, but also sort of widening their horizons, broadening their horizons with things like that, and the availability of resource and things like that. I don't know if you've seen it from your perspective. There's more people to lean on, speak to within the business, where we're sort of scattered across the country as well geographically. I think potentially partly by design, but more by coincidence of people that were sort of invested in the topic. We've got a lot of people who are really passionate about the mental health thing, which is lovely to see from my perspective as a new person. So
I think you generally feel you can pick up the phone to anyone within DM, and if you need to vent or speak to somebody about what's happened, there's always somebody there to listen, whether it is a mental health first aider or just your colleague who sits next to you. Or
ultimately we want our people to be safe, don't we? And that's both from a mental perspective, but also safe. And I think we're very, very aware, I think, aren't we, that the kind of sometimes that we're entering a quite emotive world, and we need to make sure that we've got the best tools, and that we're not putting people in unsafe situations, I think actually it's work that we've got to keep working at, because we can't stand still on it.
No.
It's something we need to keep going with. Okay. Just to finish off kind of our discussions on this, looking forward, right? So in a way, we've kind of just started. We talk about a lot of big projects, but I'm afraid there's a lot more to come.
Yeah.
where do you think we're going to end up on this in terms of the consultation and the kind of how are we going to get the public on board with this?
There's two ways to look at it. I think personally that us being out there and being how we are, and being sort of open and transparent, and DM being approachable, easy to speak to, and things like that, I think is going to reap rewards in the future, because we're going to be across a lot of these projects nationally. People are going to start to recognise DM, and hopefully they're going to start recognising for the right reasons and not putting the letters in the bin or not opening them, because we're going to change that mentality that we're easy to speak to. We do try and help. We do facilitate. We do cooperate where we possibly can for both our client and also the landowner. And I think that's going to really, really, really reap benefits moving forward as there's more and more projects.
And I think we can only learn and develop as we go as well. So, we're at a stage now where we're providing training to our colleagues. We're making sure we're trying to follow best practice when we're out on site and trying to get these landowners on board. Like you said, if we're setting a good precedent now, hopefully that gives them confidence in us going forward across multiple projects. And I think it's important that we learn from our mistakes, and we're always checking back to see if there's anything we can do to improve the service that we're providing to our colleagues, to the landowners, to our client. I think it's just an ever-evolving process.
Good. Okay. And I think you touched on a few things there. And I think for me, it is, you need to do the letters, and you need to do all that stuff. Absolutely. But what's really, really important is that time, that face time that you have with people, because you need to, you need to see people, talk to people. You can't expect to do it all by letter. And that's, I think, is going to be the key, is that relationship bit.
Yeah, people need to get out in front of the landowners and the client as well. I think is also beneficial to have there with you, or just making sure that they do have access to the actual project itself as well.
Yeah, I think the written word can be interpreted in whichever way the reader wants to do it. But whereas if you're having a conversation with body language and interacting with people, I think both messages from both sides are sort of taken and easier to digest.
Yes, definitely.
Good. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today, guys. And I'll tell you what, we'll get you. I can say this to everybody, but in a 2 years' time, we'll get you back, and you can then, without scars, you can tell us how you got on.
Yeah, okay.
We can say it worked.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys.